Welcome back to another term of the Cambridge RSE seminars. So we're delighted this time round to have with us Eli Chadwick from the University of Manchester, the eScience lab. They have a background initially in physics, though have done a lot of work with life sciences sort of since then, and also, as some of you may know, had a role at the Carpentries before they moved to become a senior RSE at Manchester. So I was chatting to them a little bit at RSECon, I think last year or 2 years ago, and about sort of this thing called RO crates, which sounded quite interesting from a metadata and research software point of view. So I was keen to have a talk about that from them, and so that's what they're going to talk about to us today.
Cool. Thank you, Jack. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, okay. Hopefully you can see me online. Yeah, so I am Eli. I am trying to get the Zoom chat out of the way of my slides. Okay. Yeah, so I'm a senior research software engineer at the University of Manchester. And yeah, the eScience lab is part of the Department of Computer Science. So Manchester does have a central RSE team, but I don't work in that team. I work in the eScience lab, which is a separate group. And yeah, RO Crate is all about packaging research outputs with their metadata for reproducibility in a sort of a cross-domain way. So I think this is going to be about a 30-minute talk, but I'll pause for questions at the end of each kind of section. So I'll introduce myself a bit and then explain sort of the motivations behind how RO Crate came to be, then a bit about technically how it works, and then some of the ways that we're using it at the end. So first off, who am I? So yeah, as Jack mentioned, I have a physics degree, and then I have slowly strayed further from physics over time. So after I graduated, I spent a few years at STFC, bouncing around a bunch of different projects. While I was there, I became a fellow of the Software Sustainability Institute, which in turn helped me to become a carpentries instructor and teach a few workshops. I also, as part of that fellowship, did a lot of learning around disability and accessibility, which some of you know me for in the RSE community. And as part of that, I became a certified professional in accessibility core competencies. And then in 2023, I spent some time working for the Carpentries directly as a software developer, helping to keep all their infrastructure going. And then in 2024, I moved to Manchester into my current role, where I am now. And some other things about me. So notably, I'm an RSE without a PhD. I like to highlight that because sometimes people assume I have a PhD. I don't call me doctor. I am a user of assistive technology, so I use voice control and eye tracking because I have problems with my hands sometimes. As I said, I'm an accessibility and user experience geek. Some of you heard me talk about that before. I have sort of become an accidental community manager in the work that I do, which I quite enjoy. I'm queer and trans. Sorry?
Those are the best ones.
Yeah. I'm queer and trans, and I like to be visible about it, especially in the current political climate. You might find me crafting at conferences. I'm sometimes in a corner crocheting. And at least for now, I am LLM free, and I highlight that because all this is written without ChatGPT. My words are ChatGPT free, and I prefer it that way, but I know not everyone does. Yeah. So yeah, why am I here? So I am one of the core developers of RO Crate, which is a community-driven standard for packaging research outputs with their metadata. And I'm going to attempt to persuade some of you to use it, or at least make sure that you know that this is a thing that exists that might be useful to some of your projects. So to set the scene a bit, here are some common problems in research, some personas that you might think about. As a data creator, you might ask, how can I ensure that other people know how to reuse my data and my workflows? If you're a data consumer, you might download a data set and then realize you can't make sense of anything in it because the file naming is really weird and you don't understand the data format, and there's no, like, the columns all have these cryptic names in the data files. And so you ask, how do I make sense of this? And then if you're a data architect trying to think about, you've got a new project starting up, you're thinking, how can we manage the data that we produce in a fair way, compatible with open science principles and so on. And these are all at least partly questions about metadata, or metadata can help to answer these questions. And people have been working on this for quite a long time, long before I joined the team. There's this sort of initial movement called FAI research objects. And so trying to break away from that traditional perspective of the thing that you publish is a paper and nothing else has any academic value. We all know that's not true. And so this is, long time work to try and make data, code, and other resources first-class citizens of scholarship. And try to promote publishing collections of resources together as one shareable, citable resource. So you don't just have your paper and then your code somewhere else. You have your paper, which is probably connected to your code and your data. And to enrich those resources and collections with additional information that enables reproducibility and reusability. And when I talk about research objects, I mean just any digital resource that aims to go beyond the PDF for this kind of scholarly publishing. And so there are a bunch of challenges that the FAI research object movement was trying to solve. Some of these were around, there's a lack of standardized ways to package research outputs. There's limited interoperability between different systems and data types. It's harder to publish different kinds of data together. And so the solution had to focus on describing and packaging data with its metadata in a platform-independent way, so you can exchange it between different services, and then being able to publish and archive these kind of mixed objects and cross-references. There are also plenty of barriers to reproducibility and reuse, especially when you just focus on papers. If you are sharing data around, sometimes you lose the context for how that data was generated or where it came from. And existing metadata standards are pretty complex. So we focused on linking data to the code and workflows that were used to create it and analyze it, and making datasets more discoverable by making them self-describing, and then propagating that provenance wherever the data goes, the metadata should go with it. And we also wanted to reuse a lot of the existing standards and not build something completely from scratch and just invent yet another standard. Reuse what exists, but try to hide some of the complexity to make it more accessible to people who aren't really embedded in this kind of metadata space. And so out of this initiative grew RO Crate, which stands for Research Object Crate, which is the project that I work on. And so the core idea of RO Crate is that you take these sort of disparate research outputs, you take your papers, your results, your workflows, your data, and you connect them together using linked data, which is like a web technology. And so that you sort of put them together in this conceptual crate. They don't all have to be right in the same folder necessarily, but conceptually they are linked together in a way that makes things more discoverable, more executable, and therefore more reproducible. So yeah, the aims of RO Crate are to be infrastructure independent. We avoid any kind of repository or service silos. We try to get integrated with a bunch of different services. And then for those services to be able to exchange RO Crates with each other. We try to make it familiar and developer friendly. So it uses web native technologies. So if you're familiar with RDF, the resource description framework, JSON LD, that sort of thing, it will be familiar to you. But also if you are used to metadata in a kind of JSON or YAML kind of structure, it should be friendly to you as well. So we've got something that is both machine and human readable, and also is search engine accessible because it's using the same kinds of technologies that are used for search engine optimization, coincidentally. And then a core principle is that we really embrace the diversity of the research community. So it's kind of RO Crate is open-ended. It doesn't try to say you have to have this metadata and only this metadata. You can extend it in all different directions. It tries to be self-describing. It can be used as like an interlinguer, so you can convert from other metadata formats to RO Crate and back. And we do that through adaptable metadata profiles, which I'll talk more about later on. So before I go into a little bit of a techier deep dive, are there any questions immediately? No? Okay, so a bit about how RO-Crate works. If we have, suppose we have like a folder with some data that we want to publish, and we want to turn this into an RO-Crate, so add some metadata to it. How do we go about that? Basically, you add a special file called RO-Crate metadata.json, and then you distribute this whole folder as one object. You distribute it together, and that's it. The presence of this metadata file is the only thing, is what makes this an RO-Crate. So you don't have to change anything about your data structures, your data formats. You just have to add this metadata file. And that might be something that you can generate from existing metadata that you store in another format. Obviously, it's a little bit more complicated than this because you do have to populate this metadata file with stuff. Yeah, and as a bonus, you can also add a human-friendly HTML file, which I'll show you what that looks like later. This basically makes it easier for humans to read the dataset rather than having to trawl through JSON files. So in this RO-Crate metadata file, we use the JSON LD format, which is JSON for linked data. This is pretty simple and extensible for a whole range of use cases. You can treat it as RDF if you want to be in that sort of full linked data space, but you can also just treat it as JSON if you don't really care about the linked data stuff. We base the terms that are available in the kind of context. The vocabulary it's based on is schema.org, and then we've extended it with a few other terms picked from other vocabularies. And basically the purpose of this file is to describe the dataset and the contextual metadata for that dataset. So who created this data and how did they create it and what study does it belong to and who funded it and what's it related to and how can I actually use this data? And we do that by organizing the metadata into entities. These are effectively JSON objects, but in RO-Crate we call them entities. At the core of everything, you have this root data entity, which is the wrong screen. We have this root data entity, and this is basically the main data set, the core of the data set, or it represents the whole of the data set and includes everything else. So it typically represents the whole of the folder or the primary output. And then this will have these sort of relationships it will have various parts, and these will point to data entities. So these are metadata that represents a file or directory that is in itself a particular research output. So these might be your data files, images, text files, these sorts of things. Usually these live within the crate, but they can also be external references, which you would do via persistent identifiers like DOIs, ideally. And then for each of these data entities, I've lost my mouse. You have these contextual relationships. So you might have some of your data has been funded by a particular organization, or some of your data has been authored by a particular person or is published by a particular organization. And so these are contextual entities that provide this kind of descriptive metadata about the people, organizations, software, and the various processes through which the data came to be. And so yeah, these are all about providing that context and that provenance. And you might think, well, what if my data is maybe it's sensitive, it can't be published anywhere. It might be already served over an API as like individual files, and you can't publish it in this kind of folder format. Maybe it's already been published and it's already got a DOI, but you still want to provide some extra metadata about it. You can do that with what we call detached RO-Crate because it's detached from that kind of folder structure. You can still create a metadata file somewhere else and reference the data through its identifiers. So you can distribute a metadata file that all it does is reference other data sets and collect them together. Say these are things that go together and have some relevance to each other. And particularly in the API kind of case, you have data that's served over an API. You can then serve the metadata alongside it over a slightly different API endpoint. And so RO-Crates, because of this nature of linking lots of entities together and being able to cross-reference to external data sets, they're kind of naturally interconnected with each other and also with the wider web. So in the top is sort of another graphical representation of that same kind of data set. So you have the root data entity in the middle here, this core of the data set has various parts that are files or collections of files published by them, references out to organizations, authors, and so on. It references the RO crate specification to say that this is what I'm following, and so on. And you publish this, you give it a DOI, and then other things can now reference this data set. So you might have another RO crate that is a paper that actually does some extra analysis on this data or uses this data or is about this data in some way. It can now reference this data set. Or you might have a workflow that takes this data set as an input and again can cross-reference it. And so you build up this web of interconnected references across the internet. And this is now what we call a knowledge graph. And you can basically collect all this data, combine it, you can run queries on it, you can analyze it in interesting ways. So you can, find me all the workflows that have used my data set as an input, or find me all the data sets that have been authored by this person, and so on. And so we obviously promote this as a way to improve the fairness of your data, but fairness is not just about machine readability. So on the left is what the raw JSON LD looks like, just the start of one of these metadata files. We have like the context at the top, which is sort of the list of terms that are available to you. And then this graph, which contains all of those entities, those data and contextual entities that all cross-reference each other. But on the right is a HTML representation of exactly the same thing, which is a lot more usable for a human because you can basically look at it and say, okay, here's the name and description of this data set. Here's when it was published. You can click these various links to get into sort of the nested metadata that's further about the individual data files. And so we encourage people to create these HTML previews. We have tools that help you do that. Because your data set, you want your data set to be as usable by humans as it is by machines. Machines can read the JSON really easily, and while you can read it as a human, it's nicer to use the HTML side. Now I talked about how we sort of embrace the diversity of the user community, and we do that through RO crate profiles. So these are community developed extensions to the RO crate specification that basically provide sets of rules and expectations for the structure and metadata of a particular set of RO crates. And these are designed to enable reliable programmatic consumption of RO crates within a particular community. So we have some profiles that are domain focused. For example, we have profiles around earth science data, which has all this kind of spatial information. We have a profile for biodiversity genomics, which is trying to capture metadata from like sample through lab processes, through like analysis processes. But then we also can have profiles that focus on particular types of data. So workflows or data that follows a particular investigation study assay model, which is used a lot in the life sciences. Electronic lab notebooks, a number of electronic lab notebook providers like eLab FTW and RSpace. They have a shared file format, which is based on RO crate. And so, yeah, it doesn't matter what domain you're working in. If you're using those tools, you produce this kind of RO crate. And these profiles are not mutually exclusive. So you can combine them with each other. You can extend them based off each other. It's kind of a duck typing kind of situation. So you say, if an RO crate follows these particular metadata patterns, it can be called a workflow RO crate or an electronic lab notebook RO crate. And we have a particular family of profiles that kind of extend and inherit from each other. I'll talk a bit more about this later. And that whole kind of workflowy topic. And over time, we've built up this ecosystem of tools. So RO crate has quite a global community of users and developers, and they create lots of stuff. So we have libraries to create read and write RO crates in a bunch of different languages, like Python, JavaScript, Ruby, Java, and R. We have conversion tools. We have editors that allow you to edit the metadata in a browser. We have validation tools, so you can check that your RO crate follows the specification. We have visualization tools like that HTML preview I showed you before. And then we have profiles, which I mentioned, tools to help you capture data provenance. And then we're working on a lot of repository integrations with many various data repository platforms. And so when you adopt RO Crate within a software ecosystem, you get this standardized data packaging, which then supports reliable data consumption within those research environments. It means you can share data across tools, services, and different repositories. And the data is always traveling with its metadata, which includes its persistent identifiers, provenance, annotations with particular ontologies, which also means that credit and attribution for the people that did that work originally is also maintained and also travels with the data, which sometimes can get lost. And this all enhances reproducibility because datasets can be linked to executable workflows. And I'll talk a bit more about this later as well. It also can enable sensitive datasets to be described and moved between different secure environments with clear governance. And the metadata can be shared sometimes more widely than the data can. So yeah, it can apply in all these different stages of research. I have seen there's a question in the chat saying, can I nest RO crates? Yes, you can, and people do. There's a few different ways of approaching it, but yeah, ultimately you can have within a sort of top level RO crate, you could have a folder which has its own RO crate metadata file. So that is now a nested RO crate. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. And similarly, when you kind of cross-link, cross-reference RO crates that live in different places, you're nesting them in a kind of way as well. And people have done work on when you're reading one RO crate and it references another RO crate, because when you describe it in a metadata, you say, this is another RO crate. There are tools that I think, this is a new feature, so I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure they can now go and fetch the metadata of that second crate as well.
Does it work both ways? I mean, say one crate reference another, can you actually have a reference back from the code crate to the coding one?
Okay, so like referencing from sort of a nested crate back to its parent crate. That's a bit more difficult, mainly because the design of RO crate is that it's mainly aware of what's in the folder kind of downwards. Yeah, you can't really navigate kind of up out of but again, this is something that people want to do and are actively exploring ways to do. So yeah, we just kind of haven't really settled on a community agreement for how to approach that yet. Any other questions?
I think this is mostly for published data. What about applications like experiments, calibrations that basically collected in a single place and want to be kept within the lab that should be referencing, but in download your lab usage, basically.
So like capturing like iteratively processes that are happening?
Yes, so say for instance you've got a collection of calibration experiments doing calibration of assets.
Yeah.
Want to be able to compare calibration of different days for specific device.
Yeah. Yes, so you can use it for that kind of case as well. So yeah, RO was originally designed for that data publication use case, but yeah, there's a use case I'll talk about in a bit, which they're doing exactly that kind of thing in one of their upcoming projects. So yeah. Okay, so yeah, I'll talk a bit about how RO Crate is being used in a few different projects. It's used across a lot of different domains. So at Manchester, we do, I would say, a greater fraction of our work is with the life sciences domain and bioinformatics, which is why those boxes are the biggest on here, because it's mainly projects I work with. But then there's people working with it in kind of the plant sciences, also a group in Australia doing a lot of work on language and cultural heritage data sets, material scientists, and climate science as well. We've just had a couple of different projects kick off around applying RO-Crate for climate science in even more detail. And there's probably some domains that I missed off here as well. We have, but I'm going to highlight more of the cross-domain applications, 3 of them in particular. So workflows, data archiving, and then trusted research environments. So in the workflows thing, my icon's gone slightly strange. So yeah, this is the same diagram that I showed earlier about this kind of inheritance of different profiles. So we start with being able to describe like a workflow in an abstract sense. Say this is a workflow that does this. It takes a CSV as input. It produces this thing as output. Be able to describe it in that kind of abstract way. And we have workflow RO-Crate for that. As you get more details, you can define workflow tests. And there is a service called Life Monitor, which is designed around automatically monitoring a workflow and running its tests whenever it's updated. And so we have a profile for that. There's the workflow testing RO-Crate. And then when a workflow is executed, you want to capture not just the workflow that was run, but also the specific inputs and outputs. Maybe you want to capture information about the environment it was run in, the kind of metrics about how long it took and this sort of thing. And you can capture all of that and put that in an RO-Crate as well. So we have this kind of workflow run RO-Crate family of profiles, which have increasingly detailed descriptions of these kinds of processes. And yeah, they all kind of build on each other. And so the most detailed one is called Provenance RO-Crate, which describes every tool that ran as part of a workflow. And we've incorporated this into a big workflow services ecosystem in EOSC, which is the European Open Science Cloud. So we have, at the core of it is Workflow Hub, which is a workflow registry. You can upload workflows from any like workflow language. And this basically can export any of those workflows as RO-Crates. They can be imported then into services like Galaxy or Wifex. These are both workflow engines. You can then run a workflow. You can publish those outputs to something like Zenodo. And yeah, you can also, for the workflows that you register in Workflow Hub, you can define tests for them and then enable Life Monitor to go to automatically run those tests and, have a sort of health check on your workflows automatically. And so there's this whole interconnected range of stuff. And a lot of it is based on, or a lot of it is able to export RO-Crates and exchange RO-Crates with each other. And those RO-Crates include things like the contributors, the license, the workflow system that they're based on. It contains the executable workflows in their native format, but also sometimes interoperable workflow descriptions using the common workflow language. They can include software citations, like specific tools that appear in a workflow, the kind of required data sources, test suites, and yeah, that workflow execution provenance. And this is the specific use case I was talking about. So at the Science, Technology Facilities Council and the Diamond Light Source and the Physical Sciences Data Infrastructure, they have a couple of related projects that are around reproducible workflows. So at the Harwell campus in Oxfordshire, they run a lot of, they have like this physical experiment infrastructure with like X-ray spectroscopy and muon spectroscopy. And alongside that, there's a big computational program for simulating those experiments so that you can spend more resources simulating things and then go do it for real when you know what you want. And so they did an exploratory work first, reproducing published analyses of X-ray experimental data. And they did that by building workflows in Galaxy. So Galaxy is a workflow engine that sort of grew out of the life sciences domain, but is now used across a bunch of different domains. And it comes with this interactive workflow builder. You can build tools for it to integrate into it. And yeah, it has two-way integration with Workflow Hub and everything, all the workflows you run in Galaxy or export from Galaxy, all of that can be exported as RO-Crates. So this team did some work reproducing analyses based on published papers. They published the workflows that they made to Workflow Hub. They wrote a paper about how they did that and the different cases they made. And all of the data sets with the actual workflow executions are all published to Zenodo. And you can download these and you can re-import them back into Galaxy and you can run their research. You can run their, you can run the workflow again. And this team, to come back to your question, one of the next things they're doing is using RO crates to capture calibration runs of, I don't know if it's the experiments themselves or if it's simulations. I don't remember all of the details. But yeah, they're doing kind of exactly what you're talking about, where they're running, I think they're running simulations for how they want to configure these experiments. And those are being captured as RO crates and stored somewhere. The next case I wanted to highlight was around data archiving. So RO-Crate is suitable for long-term data archival because it's got, firstly, a clearly defined specification. It uses these well-supported web technologies. So if, schema.org and JSON-LD go down, a lot of the web is going to break, not just RO-Crate. And also because you can use it with any kind of data and there's no restrictions on the kinds of data you can describe with RO-Crate. And so data repositories can either choose to support RO-Crate natively. RO Hub and Paradisec are repositories that have been built with an RO-Crate kind of native data model. But you can also convert RO-Crate to and from other data models, which is what's been done in platforms like FedMseek and Dataverse. They've got these integrations or extensions that you can add in. And then for Zenodo, we're working on a closer integration. But for now, we have a package that can do that conversion, like a third-party Python package. That can convert from RO-Crate format to DataSite, which is what Zenodo wants to ingest. And we have a few different use cases on this front. So the Australian team at the Language Data Commons Australia work with the Pacific and Regional Archive for Digital Sources in Endangered Cultures. So these projects have these large collections of cultural heritage data sets, which include things like recordings of spoken language. They've got big corpuses of like Australian English. They've also got recordings and like written transcriptions of like indigenous languages that they want to protect and archive. And so they have some of the really large nested collections. They have their own profile for how they structure those collections in a readable way. And then in contrast, we have, well, not really in contrast, in a different case, we have in the Hungarian research community, they have a tool called ARP, which stands for something in Hungarian that I cannot remember. But they have a data repository and an RO-Crate manager tool, which allows you to edit the metadata right in the browser. And that's a custom Dataverse instance with extensions that let you do that. And then my third example is around trusted research environments, also known as secure data environments and various other names. And so the key thing in this case is that the data that's involved is sensitive. The data itself cannot be published, but we still want to capture the research that is being done with that data, the processes we want to make transparent, because a lot of the time this is medical data, it's patient data that's accessed through the NHS. It's in the public interest to know how that data is being used without that data being revealed. And so we're using RO-Crate as a way to capture research workflows that are happening in these trusted research environments, capturing the processes like the sign-off, the disclosure control, all the different processes that have to go in to make that a safe process. And at the end, you get an RO-Crate out that describes all the provenance of the research without requiring that the data itself be published. And so, yeah, we're working on that at the moment. Hopefully in a few months, we'll have some interesting demos on this topic. Yeah. Oh, and I was going to mention, because I learned that a bunch of you are HPC people, this can be done in a sort of HPC context too. So I was talking earlier about the Galaxy project. They have at least there's a sort of European-wide instance that does a lot of like job distribution to distributed computing. I think they have dedicated HPC centers as part of that. And they're still able to sort of collect all this provenance and package it into RO-crate formats. And similarly, if it's I think there's HPC aspects to trusted research environments as well. I'm not an expert on that topic, but again, you can do this there as well. So yeah, in summary, RO-crate we try to make it easy to adopt. It's pretty easy to consume. It's naturally interoperable and interconnected, and it's really customizable for domain-specific needs. So if you are interested in learning more about RO-crate, you are welcome to join our community. We have these beginner-friendly drop-in sessions. It's basically me having office hours for just anyone to come and chat. And I run these twice a month for the European, Middle East, Africa region. So the next one will be next Thursday, the first Thursday of the month. And yeah, obviously you can chat to me now also. But yeah, these are all online, so you can come anytime and ask me questions. I really like getting into like technical details about what individual people's projects are about. So yeah. Yes, here's a link to, well, the RO-crate website has basically information about all the stuff that I've talked about. You can contact me by email. Yeah, thank you.